Hello, friends. Welcome to the More You Know podcast. I'm your host, Brian Yu. If you're always curious and wanting to learn something new, then this podcast is for you. For an hour a week, join me as I learn from people all around the world about their hobbies and interests, and hopefully it will inspire you to do further research on these topics. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to this episode of The More You Know. I'm joined with Sean Cover. Sean, give us a brief background of yourself.
Hi there, Brian. Happy to be here. I'm Sean. I'm in my mid to late 20s in New York City. I work in nonprofit finance for an organization that receives a lot of grant money. And a few years ago, I started wondering to myself about how money works as a system. You know, we go to work every day to earn money, and we have a lot of opinions about how money is spent by people, companies, and governments, but most of us really don't know how money really works as a system and the effects that how a system of money is set up affects our society in ways that are even beyond financial. So I first started wondering about this 3 or so years ago, and I've spent the last few years learning and researching systems of money, the history of money, how our system really works, why some monies succeed and why some monies fail. And I have been pursuing more knowledge of this question recently, and it's been quite a fascinating rabbit hole to dive into.
I think everyone should have a basic knowledge of money and how it affects the economy, but let's get down to the one question that everyone asks and that I've been seeing a lot posted on social media, and is, if we're in such debt right now, why can't we just print money?
Right. So we are in a lot of debt right now. The debt is more than $20 trillion, and it's only going up. It's skyrocketed even more with coronavirus, and the question is, why can't we just print more money? And the right way to think about it is through two different examples right now. First, actually, we should backtrack to sort of thinking about what is money, right? And to do that, let's first take a quick look at why we need money. You know, we've all heard of barter before and bartering for goods, and it's important to understand why that doesn't work, right? If you're exchanging one thing for another thing directly, like I'm a chicken farmer and you're a blacksmith, but you don't want chickens, then we can't conduct trade, right? So a system of money makes it so that we can all value the same good. So money is really just an exchange rate. Money is really just an exchange rate, is why we have money. And take a look at the room around you right now, right? You see a computer, a desk, maybe some pencils, some cups, right? If you imagine that everything in your room right now has a total of $100, right? Everything in your room is worth $100, pretending that your room is an economy. If you double the amount of money to $200, what changes in your room right now? Nothing. You still have two cups, one desk, one computer. What happens now, though, is that the price of each thing in your room goes up. So creating more money doesn't buy more stuff. In one more brief example, if you think of the American economy like a big cheese pizza cut into 8 slices, when you print more money, you're not making the pizza any bigger. You're instead now cutting the pizza into 9 slices. So you're not really buying any more stuff. All you do by printing more money, and if we printed more money to theoretically erase the debt, is printing more money reduces the value of every dollar already in existence. So prices of goods would skyrocket if we just printed more money to alleviate the debt.
That is probably the best definition of inflation that I've ever been taught. I wish that my econ teachers would have used that, because that made inflation so much more understandable, because I never really thought of it like that. And I think that's where a lot of people like get confused about inflation of like how does it affect us? Like how does money like cause inflation? But that was a
Right.
really good example.
Thank you. And it's important to even look at this a little bit further. Although a mantra that you and listeners should just repeat is printing more money does not buy more stuff. Um, but we have this system of money that is inflationary, right? That means that over time, prices go up. Um, and we've been conditioned to think that this is how good money should work, right? We want prices to go up over time. But why does that make sense? You know, most people's first instinct would be, why do we want the price of goods to go up over time? And the answer to that is because when prices go up over time, debt has less of a burden over time. And what I mean by that is, imagine you have $100,000 in 1970, right? And you use that $100,000 to buy a house in 1970, and you take out a mortgage for $100,000 to buy a house in 1970. In 2020, you're able to sell that house for $600,000. So the real value of your debt goes down over time in an inflationary monetary system. And that's what the government wants. They want us to take out loans, to invest in things, to drive technological progress further. Um, and a result of that is that prices go up over time.
What would you say is a healthy amount of inflation? Because when I read on Reddit and like on a lot of financial websites, a lot of them mention how if you want to get into a high yielding savings account, you want to find one that's around 1 to 2%, because that will cover inflation. So is 1 to 2% like a healthy amount of inflation?
So, what the Federal Reserve, who controls the money supply in the US, wants, what they aim for is 2% inflation a year. Um, the risk, of course, is if you have inflation go too much higher, you get into a situation like Zimbabwe or Venezuela, or most recently Lebanon, where rapid inflation occurs and the currency essentially collapses. So the Federal Reserve aims for 2% a year inflation. But that's not what I think really happens. The official inflation statistic is the Consumer Price Index, which is a basket of goods that people buy, right? So the average price of food, gas, and many other things is in the CPI, which is the official inflation statistic that we use predominantly in America. And inflation has actually been pretty low recently. I mean, for the last 20 years or so, inflation has been low. Now, to me, and what my journey throughout money has, or how it has aroused suspicion in me, is it doesn't quite make sense to me that inflation could be so low, 1 to 2%, while at the same time we see record price growth in things like healthcare, in college tuition, and even in stock markets hitting all-time highs, right? So I think that inflation is being undercounted or not misrepresented, because the CPI is a valid measurement for the growth of prices in those things, but the CPI does not count stock growth, college tuition growth, or nor does it have an adequate measure for. Let me rephrase, because college tuition growth is included in the CPI, but the cost of houses and healthcare is not really counted in the CPI. So I think more inflation than 2% is occurring, but it's going to places that are outside of the CPI. So I think the actual devaluation of the dollar is being misrepresented or
Yeah,
undercounted.
you mentioned stock growth right now, and I think a lot of people, including myself, are kind of confused with the current situation that America is in right now. We're in a pandemic right now. A lot of people are unemployed. How is the stock market right now, like hitting all time highs from where they were in, I think, in like January?
Right, January, February. So going back to 1971, prior to 1971, the dollar was on a gold standard, right? Which meant that there was a cap to the amount of new dollars that could be created based on reserves of gold. Since 1971, we are no longer on a gold standard, and there is no longer any cap to the amount of money that could exist in our, circulate. What has happened since then is the amount of money that is circulating has gone exponential. There is more than 10 times the amount of money circulating than there was in 1970. What does this all mean for stocks? Well, we have to think about how new money is predominantly created in this country, right? The way money is created is predominantly through bank loans. When a bank makes a loan to a customer or a corporation, that is new money that is being created out of nowhere. And since 1971, more money has been created out of nowhere than ever before. When that new money is created out of nowhere, again, more than there's ever been before, the people who have access to that money are using it to typically invest in financial assets. And that leads to significant financial asset growth. Starting in 2008 with the Great Recession, the Federal Reserve adopted a new monetary stimulus program called quantitative easing, where they even further exponentially added to the money supply by purchasing government bonds. They added to the money supply even beyond the process of bank loans. And what happens to this new money when it comes into the system is essentially it just gets financialized. It goes into the stock market, it goes into real estate, and it goes into other financial assets. So, given the unprecedented amount of stimulus that has been occurring for the coronavirus, it's pretty clear to me that it's almost as simple as the Federal Reserve is going to keep printing money and it's going to keep going into the stock market to just sort of prop it up. I mean, it's not real growth that's occurring. It's, inflated growth from money printing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to come down anytime soon.
Going back to your statement on how money is kind of just created through bank loans to corporations.
And, people who want to take out mortgages, as well.
So is this why a lot of people kind of advocate for opening small businesses and opening up your own business? Because if you take out that loan, that money's kind of getting put back into the economy because it's giving American people and the American citizens jobs. Is that like a way of thinking about it, of like how it can get recirculated within?
Yeah, so new money is created through these loans, and ideally it gets invested into something like a small business, and then that small business grows to the point where the loan can be paid back in full, and then the business still exists and is generating income. Yes, so that's the kind of investment that the government the government wants, of course. It's good for economic growth. And that is the benefit of this sort of inflationary system, which encourages people to take out loans and to get into debt. And to quickly expand on that, what I mean is that our inflationary system encourages you to go into debt because if you hold your dollars in cash, you lose purchasing power over time through inflation. Back to the example of if you bought a house in 1970, you know, if you took out a mortgage for $100,000, then you sell your house in 2020 for $600,000, you have made money from that transaction. If instead of taking out a mortgage, you just saved $100,000 in the bank, then in 2020 you have $100,000 that can't buy you a house anymore. So an inflationary monetary system penalizes people who want to save their money in cash and encourages you to take out debt to invest.
So is this another? Could this be like another reason why your credit score, why they kind of like with your credit score, they kind of encourage you to get different types of loans? Is that like another reason why they would want you to try to help out the economy by just taking out loans?
Yes. Now, credit companies don't necessarily care about you helping the economy, but they do recognize that we live in an economy that is based on and survives on debt. So they want to see that you are able to, live in this debt based society. They want to see that you can take out debt and pay it back.
And then touching on the topic of college, because this kind of makes me think of college loans. Why would they make like I just don't understand how they can justify the balance of having such high tuition but having kids come out of college with such a low salary.
Right. So there's a lot of interesting stuff with regards to the price of college. And I don't have a clear conclusion on what I think we should do about it, but let me, make a couple points. The student loan crisis mostly started when, like, from the government guaranteeing student loans to everybody. And that is kind of a good thing in a way. The government has made sure that anyone can pay for college if they want to. The downside of that, though, is that almost anyone can get a student loan, and therefore, more people who are not going to be able to pay back these loans have taken out a lot of money that they're never going to be able to pay back, right? So because the system is not well managed, but at the expense of freedom. It's letting people choose what they want to do for college, but it's allowed a lot of bad debt to be accumulated that only exists in the first place. The reason the government provides these guaranteed student loans is because private banks would find those loans too risky and wouldn't give them out to people. So, that doesn't answer anything. I'm not saying that that's a program that should get rolled back because I think more people should go to college, but it's led to a scenario where now there's more people that can pay these high tuitions than ever because everyone can get a loan. And then, there's more demand for college spots than there are available spots in these colleges. And then those colleges raise the prices. Part of how prices work, the supply and demand with prices is that the price of goods, including things like college tuition, it naturally finds itself to being at a place where, they want the amount of people that are applying to be somewhat close to the amount of people that can be accepted. So prices go up over time until there's somewhat of and there's not even a balance, but it's part of what is causing these prices to go up over time. But let me backtrack again because I have some other strong thoughts on college tuition, and it sort of has to do with the U.S. dollar versus gold. I like gold, and I think a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about how gold works. It's obviously a metal that we dig out of the ground, but a lot of people in 2020 look at gold and they see some shiny rock that has no value, but we value it because we've always valued it, right? And that's not actually true. Gold does certain things better than the dollar does. The investment thesis is simple. It's easy to print new dollars, and it's hard to mine new gold. So the dollar doesn't store value very well over time, right? Because of this inflationary model. In 1970, or a $3 per hour wage in 1970 is equivalent to a $25 wage in 2020.
Oh wow.
It's the same thing, right? And that's another example of how inflation penalizes savers, right? If you had just saved your $3 an hour in the bank, in 2020 your savings are, almost worthless. It's like 1/10 of the amount that you actually worked in terms of purchasing power. So it penalizes savers, and as a result, the dollar is really not a great way to store your wealth over time. And that's why you always hear about, people should be investing in things, because it's a way to outrun inflation. It's why people say the stock market, averages about 7% per year throughout history, and that helps you maintain your purchasing power over time by beating inflation. Now, with gold, gold is really a base layer money. Gold is the same thing as the dollar and the euro. It is a base layer money. It's not really an investment because you're not investing in a company, right? With gold, even though we have the most advanced mining technology that we've ever had and are mining more gold than ever, we're still only able to increase the supply of gold by less than 2% per year, which is a very small supply inflation rate. Now, let's not confuse that with the dollar inflation rate, because the dollar inflation rate is supposed to be 2% in prices per year. The price of goods should increase by 2% per year, but we don't really know exactly how many dollars they're actually printing to get that 2% price growth. It's definitely more than 2%. With gold, the actual supply only increases by 2%. And the reason your question about college triggered me on this issue is because there's this great website, pricedingold.com, where you can see over time the value of goods priced in gold instead of dollars. I like this because it allows you to price goods in an asset, gold, that is scarce, instead of an asset like the dollar that is constantly losing value over time. And what you see when you look at the cost of college tuition at Yale on pricedingold.com is that the price of college tuition at Yale is actually lower now in 2020 than it was in 1960 if it's priced in gold. So if you took your $5,000 cash in 1960 and you bought gold with that $5,000 and stored your wealth in gold, in 2020 it would cost you less than 5,000. Or when you sold your gold in 2020, you would still have some money left over because you had entirely saved your value in gold. So gold is simply a better store of value than the dollar is, and it all plays into how our system today is sort of a war on cash and savings. They really, if you have to store your wealth in cash, you're going to fall behind because of how inflationary our monetary system is.
You speak of gold. Well, the way that you explain gold really reminds me of Bitcoin, to be honest. So we're in an age where everything's going digital right now. So you can do Apple Pay, Google Pay, all from your phone now.
Right.
And the dollar is really scarce now. I feel like no one carries cash on them really. And
It's true.
if you're saying that gold would be kind of like a better method of payment, why do you think people hate Bitcoin so much? Or do you have any thoughts toward the concept of do you have any thoughts on using Bitcoin as a method of payment, even even like in the future, because with Bitcoin there is a scarce amount. There's 21 million Bitcoins to be mined, and there's only 15 million out there right now, and it's supposed the circulation of Bitcoin is supposed to stop in like 2100 or something.
Right. So first, I want to clarify that I don't think gold is actually a better payment method for almost anything than the dollars. Gold has obvious limitations. You know, it's not easy to transport or verify or divide. You can't send it digitally, obviously, and um, right, and it's hard to trade and sell. But I do think that gold is a better way to store wealth over time. So I don't think you should be able to go to the corner store and buy a soda with a gold coin. But I do think that storing wealth in gold is a much better thing to do than having $50,000 in a savings account. So that's I want to clarify about that. Um,
Got you.
and then with Bitcoin, I am quite knowledgeable about Bitcoin, and I think that what Bitcoin is trying to do is very interesting. Now, for listeners that don't really know about Bitcoin, it was released in 2009 by a pseudonymous creator or possibly group of people called Satoshi Nakamoto, who just released the code, who released some computer code on the computer for free. Um, when you think about digital payments today with our debit and credit cards, those payments have to go through a bunch of intermediaries, right? If I pay Brian through Venmo, um, TD Bank from my end gets the information about that payment, Venmo gets the payment, and whoever Brian's bank is get the payment. Our digital system runs through a bunch of intermediaries. Bitcoin was created so that you could have digital payments more like handing a dollar bill to someone than having to go through a bunch of intermediaries. It was designed as a digital cash, which means that when you use the Bitcoin network, you're not relying on any individual, any company, or any group of people to. You don't have to trust anyone for your transaction to be valid. It's peer to peer. And that has never existed before. There's never been a way to transfer value on the internet without having to go through an intermediary. The only way to do this is by being decentralized, which means that instead of having a creator or a company, or a controller or a company, the Bitcoin network is run by tens of thousands of people running software on their computers around the world. Now, where Bitcoin is like gold, in a way, is through its scarcity. As Brian said, there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin mined. And this is a hard topic for people to wrap their brains around when they haven't heard of it, because we've never had a digitally scarce asset before. There's never been such a thing as digital scarcity before Bitcoin. In the past, most digital things are like when you have a PDF on your computer and you could simply make a copy of it and send it to someone else. Bitcoin, through its decentralized network, has been able to work past this problem, and for the first time, we have a completely hard-capped, digitally scarce asset that is infinitely divisible and that one person can send to another across the planet without going through any intermediary. So it's very impressive what Bitcoin is doing, and a lot of people don't understand it, like how it actually works, including those many people on Reddit and on Twitter. But I like Bitcoin. I love what it's trying to do. I mean, it's obviously very volatile right now. Always. And the reason that it's volatile is really because the network is so small. When right now Bitcoin has a market cap of around $200 billion, which, while that sounds like a lot and is impressive,
It's so minuscule compared to like so much else.
right? I mean, in the scheme of global financial assets and currencies, it really is minuscule, which means that it takes less big money either buying or selling to significantly sway the price. I mean, when you buy Bitcoin, it's very likely that you will be up and down and up and down and up and down on your investment at some point. But I tend to believe that over time, people are going to gravitate towards the forms of money that allow them to store their wealth the best over time. And what makes a money valuable in those ways are its properties. And Bitcoin's digital scarcity combined with its censorship resistance, meaning that no one can, you know, stop someone from transacting over the Bitcoin network. The network has the same rules for everybody. I see it continuing to be a big part of the future. And I'm pretty confident that it's going to survive. If I had to make a slightly controversial thing, I would say that Bitcoin is more likely to make it to 2050 than the euro is, because the EU is in some trouble.
That's an interesting statement. But due to time constraints, we do
Right.
have to cut this short. Thanks so much, Sean, for coming on. Where can our listeners find you?
Thank you, Brian. This went by fast. I do wish we had more time. I'm launching an audio newsletter Monday, August 3rd, called Questioning Money, where every week I spend 5 minutes or so briefly but thoroughly talking about sort of how money works and how it affects systems in ways that a lot of people don't even realize. We didn't get to talk about it here, but I think that how our system of money works is the primary driver for why inequality has gone up so much over the last couple decades, and so many more things that will be explored on Questioning Money. You can find me on Twitter at Sean Cover, SeanCover, and Questioning Money can be found at questioningmoney.substack.com. So thank you very much for your time, Brian. It was nice to talk to you, and I hope we can do it again someday.
Likewise.